His wife chose a rich man. Until her ex arrived in a private jet, the crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across the ballroom, reflecting off hundreds of champagne glasses and diamond necklaces. Every guest looked as though they belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine. Expensive laughter floated through the room like music, effortless and polished. At the center of it all stood Victoria. She smiled as photographers captured her every angle, her hand resting proudly on the arm of Richard Caldwell, one of the city's wealthiest real estate investors. 5 years ago, she had stood in another ballroom, wearing a much simpler dress beside another man. A man whose suit had been rented. A man whose hands were rough from endless overtime. A man named Ethan Carter. If someone had told her then that she would leave Ethan for another man, she would have laughed. But dreams changed. People changed. Or perhaps, money revealed who they truly were. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe self-respect is stronger than revenge, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, back to Ethan's story. You should have seen your face. Victoria laughed as she replayed the memory to her friends. When I handed him the divorce papers, he actually thought I'd change my mind. The women around her laughed politely. Richard smirked. So he begged. Worse. She took a sip of champagne. He stayed silent. She rolled her eyes. I honestly hated that silence. It made me feel like I was arguing with a wall. No one at the table noticed the elderly waiter nearby, who quietly lowered his eyes. Because he remembered. He had been serving at the cafe where the divorce papers were signed. He remembered Ethan. Not because the man had cried, but because he hadn't. The papers lay between them. Victoria removed her wedding ring, placed it gently on the wooden table. I deserve more than this. You'll never become the kind of man a woman can be proud of. The words had landed harder than any slap. Still, Ethan simply nodded. I'm sorry I couldn't give you the life you wanted. No accusations. No shouting. No desperate promises. He signed, folded the documents, picked up his old jacket, looked at her one last time, then walked away. The waiter had watched Ethan disappear into the rain without opening an umbrella. Some people leave in anger. Others leave carrying a silence so heavy, it changes the rest of their lives. 5 years earlier, Ethan had never been poor because he lacked intelligence. He was poor because every decision he made had been for someone else's future. When Victoria dreamed about opening a fashion boutique, he worked 2 jobs. When she wanted a master's degree, he sold the motorcycle he'd loved since college. When rent increased, he skipped lunch for nearly 6 months. She never knew, because he never told her. Love, to Ethan, wasn't something you announced. It was something you quietly carried. Every morning before sunrise, he left home. Every night after midnight, he returned. Sometimes Victoria was already asleep. Sometimes she wasn't home at all. Eventually, distance didn't arrive dramatically. It arrived through missed dinners, unanswered messages, silent breakfasts. Until one day, someone richer noticed Victoria. Richard entered her life wearing Italian suits and driving cars Ethan couldn't even pronounce. He spoke confidently, vacationed in Europe, owned 3 penthouses. He represented every life Victoria believed she deserved. Compared to him, Ethan looked painfully ordinary. She began comparing them. Richard bought roses. Ethan brought groceries. Richard wore Rolex. Ethan repaired leaking pipes himself. Richard talked about investment portfolios. Ethan talked about paying electricity bills on time. The comparison wasn't fair, but it happened anyway. The night she introduced Richard to her friends, someone asked jokingly, "So where's your husband?" Victoria laughed. "Oh, Ethan's probably working another overtime shift." Richard smiled. "Still chasing promotions?" Victoria shrugged. "He thinks hard work solves everything. It doesn't. It just makes you tired." Everyone laughed. Everyone, except one friend named Olivia. She looked uncomfortable because she'd once seen Ethan asleep inside his old pickup truck during lunch break. Not because he wanted to nap, because driving home wasted gasoline. He preferred saving every dollar. Olivia wanted to defend him, but Victoria had already changed the conversation. Sometimes, silence protects dignity. Sometimes, silence becomes betrayal. After the divorce, life became astonishingly quiet. Ethan rented the smallest apartment he could find. 1 bedroom, peeling wallpaper, a leaking faucet, an old wooden desk. That was all. The first night there, he unpacked exactly 6 boxes. Half contained books, The other half, old notebooks, thousands of pages, business ideas, financial models, prototype sketches, artificial intelligence logistics systems, supply chain optimization software, ideas he'd worked on quietly for almost 8 years. Victoria had always thought they were hobbies. She never realized. Those notebooks represented nearly every evening Ethan hadn't spent watching television. For years, he had sacrificed his own dream because building Victoria's future seemed more important. Now, there was no marriage left to protect, no expectations, no one waiting. For the first time in years, he asked himself a dangerous question. What if I finally choose myself? That question became everything. Days became routines. Wake at 5. Coffee. Programming. Work. Programming again. Sleep. Repeat. Friends disappeared. Relatives stopped calling. Even those who once admired him assumed divorce had broken him. Perhaps it had. But broken things don't always stay broken. Sometimes, pressure creates diamonds. The tiny apartment rarely saw sunlight. The glow from computer monitors replaced daylight. Entire nights passed unnoticed. Lines of code stretched across endless screens. Algorithms failed. Servers crashed. Investors rejected him. Banks laughed. One venture capitalist glanced at Ethan's presentation for less than 4 minutes. I'm sorry. This isn't the kind of founder we're looking for. What kind is that? Someone who looks like success. Ethan smiled politely, packed his laptop, thanked the man, left. He never returned. Months later, that investor would spend millions trying to buy into Ethan's company. Too late. Meanwhile, Victoria's life looked perfect online. Luxury vacations, designer handbags, private clubs, sunset yachts. Followers admired her glamorous marriage. They didn't see Richard constantly traveling. Didn't notice he answered every phone call by leaving the room. Didn't hear the arguments hidden behind expensive walls. Money can buy silence, but not peace. The first crack appeared during their 3rd anniversary. Victoria prepared a surprise dinner. Richard never came home. Instead, his assistant called. He'll be spending the week in Monaco. He forgot to tell you. Forgot. The word echoed louder than shouting. She sat alone before candles that slowly melted into pools of wax. For the first time, luxury felt cold. Back inside his tiny apartment, Ethan finally received one email. Subject: interested in your logistics platform. He nearly ignored it. Spam had become routine. But this message came from a venture capital firm in Singapore. Someone had tested his software. Someone understood. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Not because they questioned his intelligence, because they couldn't believe one man had built the entire system alone. 6 months later, the first investment arrived. Then another. 3 employees became 12. 12 became 60. 60 became hundreds. Warehouses adopted his technology. Shipping companies reduced costs by billions. Business magazines began writing mysterious headlines. The invisible founder changing global logistics. No photographs. No interviews. No social media. No publicity. Ethan refused every invitation. Success had finally found him. Ironically, he no longer needed anyone to witness it. Years passed. The small startup transformed into Sterling Nexus Global, a company valued in the billions. Governments became clients. Fortune 500 companies signed contracts. Entire industries quietly shifted around software designed by a man once mocked for working overtime. Journalists desperately searched for him. They found almost nothing. One blurry airport security photograph. One charity donation. One anonymous scholarship fund. That was all. People created myths. Some believed the CEO was 70 years old. Others imagined a Silicon Valley genius living on a private island. Nobody guessed. He still preferred black coffee over expensive wine. Still carried the same leather notebook. Still remembered every promise he'd once made to a woman who no longer believed in him. Not because he wanted her back. Because memories don't disappear simply because people do. Then came the announcement. The largest corporate acquisition of the year. Richard's investment group had fallen into severe financial trouble after several failed projects. The only company capable of saving them. Sterling Nexus Global. An emergency gala was organized. Investors, executives, government officials, media from around the world. Victoria attended beside Richard, hoping desperately the mysterious CEO would approve the partnership. If tonight goes well, Richard whispered. Everything changes. She nodded. She had no idea. Everything already had. The ballroom lights dimmed. A voice echoed across the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, due to weather conditions, our CEO will be arriving directly from Zurich. Guests exchanged curious glances. Outside, engines thundered across the night sky. People instinctively looked through the enormous glass windows overlooking the private airport nearby. A sleek Gulfstream jet touched the runway. Its polished silver body reflected the city lights like liquid mercury. Security vehicles moved into position. Luxury sedans lined the entrance. Someone whispered, "That's him." The ballroom doors remained closed. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned. Every heartbeat seemed to wait. Victoria adjusted her dress. Richard straightened his tie. The doors slowly opened. A tall man stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. No flashy watch. No unnecessary jewelry. Just quiet confidence. His posture seemed familiar. Too familiar. Victoria frowned. No, it can't be. The man walked calmly across the marble floor. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He didn't need to. The room naturally moved aside. Then, he looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in 5 years. Time froze. Victoria's smile vanished. Ethan. She barely breathed his name. Richard frowned. You know him? Before she could answer, old habits returned. She forced an awkward laugh. He's my ex-husband. Richard glanced at Ethan's simple expression and relaxed. I didn't know they invited former employees. Victoria found herself smiling weakly. Neither did I. As Ethan approached, she spoke with the same quiet superiority she once carried years before. I'm surprised they let you into an event like this. Several nearby executives chuckled politely. Ethan stopped, looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, simply with peace. He offered the slightest nod. Good evening, Victoria. Nothing more. He continued walking toward the stage. Richard laughed softly, confident for someone who doesn't belong here. Neither of them noticed. Every board member standing near the stage had already risen to their feet. The chairman adjusted his microphone. His voice filled the silent ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my greatest honor to welcome the founder, chairman, and CEO of Sterling Nexus Global, the visionary behind tonight's billion-dollar acquisition, Mr. Ethan Carter. For one impossible second, no one breathed. Then the ballroom erupted. Thousands of people rose in a standing ovation. Applause crashed like thunder. Television cameras rushed forward. World leaders extended their hands. The chairman stepped down from the stage, not to greet Ethan, but to welcome him with both hands. Richard's face drained of color. The champagne glass slipped from Victoria's fingers. Crystal shattered across the marble floor. Neither of them seemed to hear it. Behind Ethan, a massive screen illuminated the room. Ethan Carter, founder and CEO, Sterling Nexus Global, estimated net worth $12.8 billion. He walked past Victoria without slowing, without triumph, without resentment. The screen behind him said everything that needed to be said. He had never become successful to prove her wrong. He had simply stopped living inside the limits of her imagination. The applause continued, but Ethan's expression never changed, because the loudest victory was the one that no longer needed an audience. The applause rolled through the ballroom for nearly a full minute. Not because people were instructed to stand, because they wanted to. Executives who negotiated billion-dollar mergers every week clapped with genuine admiration. Government officials waited patiently for a chance to shake Ethan's hand. International journalists called his name, hoping for a single quote from the man the business world had spent years trying to find. Victoria remained frozen. She couldn't hear the applause anymore. All she heard was her own voice from years ago. You'll never become the kind of man a woman can be proud of. The sentence echoed inside her mind with merciless clarity. She remembered the ring she had placed on the cafe table, the expressionless face across from her, the quiet apology, the rain outside the window. Back then she thought silence meant defeat. Now she finally understood. It had been dignity. Richard swallowed hard. There must be some mistake. His assistant leaned closer, whispering with obvious panic. Sir, there isn't. Our legal department confirmed it. Mr. Carter owns nearly 72% of Sterling Nexus. He has complete authority over tonight's acquisition. Richard stared toward the stage. His hands began trembling. Every debt his company owed, every negotiation, every employee depending on tomorrow's contract. Everything now depended on the man standing beneath the spotlight. The same man he had dismissed less than 2 minutes earlier. Ethan accepted the chairman's handshake before facing the audience. The applause gradually faded. He adjusted the microphone slightly. "Thank you." His voice was calm, deep, unhurried. No dramatic pauses. No arrogance. "I know many of you expected someone different." A few soft laughs spread through the audience. "For years, I avoided interviews because I wanted our work to speak louder than my face." Another wave of applause. "Our company was never built around one person. It was built by thousands of ordinary people who refused to quit after hearing the word impossible." Victoria lowered her eyes. Ordinary. That word hurt more than anything. She had spent years believing ordinary people never became extraordinary. Yet the most extraordinary man in the room had once lived beside her, and she had never truly seen him. Ethan continued. "When I founded Sterling Nexus, our office had one broken air conditioner. Our conference table was an old dining table bought from a thrift store." Soft laughter filled the ballroom. "Our first coffee machine stopped working after 3 days." Someone in the audience smiled. But every morning, the people inside that tiny office still believed tomorrow could become something bigger. He paused, looking across hundreds of faces. Success is rarely created by talent alone. It's created by people who continue after everyone else has stopped believing. No one noticed Victoria quietly wipe a tear from the corner of her eye. Not because of the speech. Because years ago, she had been one of those people who stopped believing. After the presentation, dozens of reporters rushed toward the stage. "Mr. Carter, what inspired your company? Will you acquire Caldwell Investments? What advice would you give young entrepreneurs?" Security gently guided them back. Ethan answered only a handful of questions. Then he stepped away from the cameras. As always, he preferred conversations over performances. Victoria watched him from across the ballroom. Every instinct told her to leave. Instead, her feet carried her forward. Richard noticed. "Where are you going?" She didn't answer. For the first time in years, she didn't know. She found Ethan standing beside the panoramic windows overlooking the runway. The private jet still rested beneath rows of blue airport lights. He wasn't looking at it. He was watching the city. The same city where they had once shared a tiny apartment. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "You've changed." Ethan smiled faintly. "I hope so." Another silence. "I never imagined this." He looked through the glass. "Neither did I." "You don't hate me?" The question escaped almost as a whisper. He considered it carefully. "No, I hated losing myself." "I never hated you." Those words struck harder than anger ever could. Victoria stared at the reflection in the window. "I thought you had no future." "I know. I was wrong." "You were." There was no cruelty in his voice. Only honesty. She looked at him with tears forming. "I've replayed that day in the cafe more times than you can imagine. I wanted to call. So many times. I wanted to apologize." Ethan nodded gently. "I know. You knew? You called every year on my birthday. You never left a message." Her eyes widened. You recognized the number?" "I did." "Why didn't you answer?" He smiled. "Because I wasn't ready." She frowned. "Ready for what?" "To forgive." The words hung quietly between them. Not dramatic. Simply true. "There were nights," Ethan continued, "when I convinced myself I wasn't enough. I questioned every decision. Every sacrifice. I wondered if maybe you were right." Victoria closed her eyes. "I'm sorry. I know. I was selfish. I know. I chased appearances. I know." Each answer came softly. Without accusation. Without satisfaction. Just acceptance. She finally looked directly into his eyes. "Is there any chance for us?" For a long moment, the only sound came from airplanes landing in the distance. Ethan's expression remained kind, but it carried a peace she had never seen before. "Victoria, you didn't leave because I had no future. You left because you couldn't see one." A tear rolled down her cheek. He continued. "And that's okay. People make decisions with the vision they have. You made yours. So did I. I chose to become someone I could respect." She began crying openly. "I'm not asking because you're rich. I know. I'm asking because I finally understand who you always were." He believed her. Every word. That made it harder. "I loved you." He said it so quietly she almost missed it. "I truly did. You were the reason I worked until midnight. The reason I ignored my own dreams. The reason I believed sacrificing myself was the same as loving someone. He looked down at his wedding ring, not on his finger, but inside his wallet. Old, scratched, kept there as a reminder. Then one day, I realized something. She waited. The person I was trying hardest to save was the person slowly disappearing. He met her eyes, and that person was me. Neither of them noticed Richard approaching until he stopped a few feet away. His expensive confidence had vanished. His shoulders looked smaller. His voice sounded uncertain. "Mr. Carter." Ethan turned politely. "I owe you an apology." Richard lowered his head. "I judged you. I underestimated you. I spoke to you disrespectfully. I'm sorry." Ethan offered his hand immediately. "No hard feelings." Richard hesitated before shaking it. "I hope we can still discuss the acquisition." Ethan smiled professionally. "Our legal teams will review everything tomorrow. The decision will be based on numbers, not history." Richard blinked. "You mean, our personal past has nothing to do with business?" Ethan nodded. "It never should." For the first time that evening, Richard understood why people followed this man. Power had not changed him. It had simply revealed the character that had always been there. Months later, news headlines filled financial newspapers around the world. Sterling Nexus completes historic acquisition. Thousands of jobs were saved. Several struggling companies survived. Economic analysts praised Ethan's decision to retain employees instead of replacing them. No article mentioned Victoria. No article mentioned the divorce. No article mentioned the cafe. Those details belonged to another lifetime. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan quietly visited the small neighborhood where he and Victoria had once rented their first apartment. The old bakery still stood on the corner. The owner recognized him immediately. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan smiled. "It's been a while." The elderly baker laughed. "You still want the cinnamon rolls?" "The same order." "Always." As he sat by the window, watching people hurry to work, he realized something unexpected. The pain was gone. Not hidden. Gone. There was no bitterness left to carry. Only gratitude. Because losing the life he thought he wanted had forced him to build the life he truly needed. Outside, children laughed as they chased pigeons across the sidewalk. The morning sun reflected against nearby buildings. His phone vibrated. A message from his assistant. "Your jet is ready whenever you are." Ethan looked out the window one last time. Years ago, he had walked these streets believing his story was ending. He smiled softly. He had been wrong. Stories rarely end when hearts are broken. Sometimes, that is exactly where they begin. He stood, thanked the baker, and walked toward the waiting car. This time, he wasn't driving away from someone who no longer believed in him. He was driving toward a future he had built with his own hands. He didn't become successful to make his former wife regret leaving. He became successful the day he finally chose himself. And that was the only victory that had ever truly mattered.